Some countries protect themselves by building the biggest army. A few protect themselves by always knowing in advance what the biggest army nearby is about to do to them. The second kind of power doesn't march, doesn't parade, and rarely makes it to the news. It's called intelligence. This film uses one of the most capable intelligence services ever built, Israel's Mossad, as a case study. But the real subject isn't Mossad, it's what Mossad is actually made of. Information which is organized well enough to move faster than the danger it's actually tracking. Imagine finding out about a problem 3 weeks before it happens instead of the moment that it actually happens. Same problem, but a completely different set of choices that are available to you. That gap between reacting to something and already knowing it's coming is the entire reason intelligence agencies exist. An army can only respond to what has already happened or what's unfolding in front of it. Intelligence agencies push that response backward in time to turn a faint signal into an early warning before the plan is finalized, before the shipment moves, before the deal is signed behind a closed door. This is the first rung of a ladder every intelligence service climbs the same way. A signal, which is a rumor or an intercepted call or a photograph that doesn't quite fit, becomes something that is worth collecting. Signals turns into collection, and almost none of this looks dramatic. Mostly, it looks like long-term patience. For a country the size of Israel, encircled since its founding by larger hostile militaries, this gap mattered more than almost anywhere else on earth. It could not outbuild its neighbors in tanks or population. What it could do is try to build a system that can outknow all of them. On the December the 13th, 1949, a little over a year after Israel's founding, Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion signed the order of creating a small body to coordinate the new country's scattered intelligence efforts. By April 1951, that body had been recognized into what we now call Mossad, reporting not to the parliament, not to the military, but directly and solely to the Prime Minister of the country. That structural choice is easy to skim past, but it's the real story. Ben Gurion wasn't just building any other agency, he was building an organ of the state that could act on information faster than any committee could actually debate. Because a country that had just survived a war against 5 invading armies didn't have the luxury of slow decision making. Its early recruitment reveals the same instinct. Mossad's effective agents weren't Israelis trained to convincingly intimidate someone from the surrounding Arab world, they were actually people who already belonged to it. One of the most famous operators, Eli Cohen, was born in Egypt. He didn't need to study Arab social life from a manual, he'd lived inside it. Under the alias Kamin Amin Thabet, he spent years embedded in Syria's political and military elite in Damascus in the early 1960s. The axis he built is widely credited with shaping Israel's preparation for the 1967 war before Syrian counterintelligence intercepted his transmissions and he was executed in Damascus in 1965. The lesson sits one level under the obvious one. Mossad didn't recruit people who could pretend to belong somewhere. It recruited people who already belonged and gave that very same belonging a new purpose and a new mission to actually follow. Folks, for a minute, I want you to strip away all the acronyms because they hide more than they actually explain, and they hide the one thing that separates intelligence work from every other kind of pattern finding in this film. Human intelligence isn't just having a source inside. Every human source is also a live risk. They might be feeding you exactly what their own government wants you to believe. Case officers have had a real term for accurate, low value information deliberately handed over specifically to build a source's credibility before the actual deception begins. They call it the chicken feed. A retail company never has to wonder whether its own customers are secretly working for a rival. An intelligence service always does. That difference is what makes human intelligence a different discipline from ordinary data analysis or analyst, right? Not just a more secretive version of it. Signals intelligence carry the same trap. The moment an advisory suspects a wire might not be listening, what you overhear stops being a window into the truth and starts being potentially a performance staged for your benefit. Real signals work isn't just capturing some conversations that is randomly going on, right? It is constantly asking whether that conversation was ever meant to be captured. Open source intelligence is the most underrated of all the three, precisely because it looks like it needs no tradecraft at all. During the Cold War, Western analysts watching an almost totally crossed Soviet system learned to monitor state television for one specific entirely public tell. Ordinary programming quietly replaced by somber classic music hours before any official announcement. It happened repeatedly before the deaths of Soviet leaders were actually confirmed, and nothing about that music was a secret. It was the broadcast to the whole country, right? The insight wasn't hidden in a signal, it was hidden in noticing that the absence of ordinary programming was itself the signal. None of these are separate machines. They're all different ways of feeding the same ladder, and each one carries the same underlying risk. The very act of being watched can change what there is to see. A signal gets collected, collection then gets signals which gets analyzed, weighed not just for what they say, but for who benefits if you actually believe in them. Analysis becomes insight the moment a pattern survives that scrutiny, and insight becomes a decision advantage the moment it lets you act before your advisory even knows you're actually watching or realizes you've stopped believing what they actually fed to you. Signal turns into collection, collection turns into analysis, right? And analysis turns into an insight, which then later turns into decision advantage, and an outcome is perfectly shaped before it happens. That's not a metaphor for how Mossad actually operate, right? It's the literal mechanism every time run by people who have to assume at every rung of the ladder that someone on the other side is trying to climb it against them. By the late 1950s, Adolf Eichmann, one of the chief administrator of the Holocaust, was hiding in Argentina under a false name called Ricardo Kelment. The first signal wasn't a satellite or a wiretap, right? It was a suspicious father in Buenos Aires who noticed his daughter's boyfriend speaking admiringly of the Nazi years and who quietly passed the tip along. That signal, unconfirmed rumor, could easily have gone nowhere. Instead, Mossad actually spent months on collection, watching the house, photographing the man, timing his bus route from home to work, and vice versa. Analysis only became certainty once agents confirmed a small, unrelated fact hiding in plain sight. The date of his wedding anniversary matched Eichmann's and not Kelman's. That was the insight. The decision advantage that followed was enormous. Because on May the 11th, 1960, agents took him off a quiet street near his home, held him for days at a safe house, and flew him to Israel to face a public trial rather than a quiet killing which had been discussed and rejected. The world got a trial, and with it, the very first time many Holocaust survivors testified publicly on a global stage. After the 1972 Munich Olympics massacre, in which 11 Israeli athletes and coaches were killed, Israel authorized a year-long campaign against those it held responsible for actually planning this whole massacre. This is the case that shows what happens when the leader breaks or when the ladder breaks. In July 1973, a Mossad team in Lillehammer, Norway, believed that they had allocated Ali Hussein Salme, right, a senior black September figure. Some agents on the ground reportedly raised doubts the man didn't quite match the photographs and he was overheard speaking a language their actual target didn't speak. Those doubts were overruled. The team shot and killed an innocent Moroccan waiter, Ahmed Bouchiki, in front of his pregnant wife. 6 agents were later arrested and convicted by Norwegian courts. Israeli paid a compensation to the family decades later, even without admitting the responsibility. The failure here wasn't some kind of lack of information. It was a decision advantaged claim before the analysis actually went on to fully support it. Confidence outrunning verification. Mossad's own European network was compromised for years afterwards. Salmeh himself was later identified with far more certainty and killed by in a car bomb in Beirut in 1979. But Lillehammer remains the clearest documented cases of the ladder collapsing under its own momentum. None of this reputation was built on mysticism, right? It resets on a small number of specific repeatable habits. One is a genuinely long time horizon. The Eichmann case took years from rumor to arrest. The Iranian archive took roughly 2 years from the discovery to the actual execution. Most organizations, public or private, aren't built to sit on an opportunity that long without losing patience or nerve. Another is what happens after failure. Lee Hammer wasn't buried, it became the case Mossad rebuilt its own European operations around. Safe houses abandoned, protocols rewritten, institutional memory reshaped by one specific admitted mistake. Not every case in this film involves a weapon. For nearly 2 years, Mossad watched a nondescript warehouse in a quiet Tehran suburb after noticing a signal as mundane as a shipping habit. Iranian officials kept quietly moving specific material to that one building long before Mossad understood exactly what was inside it. Before ever setting a foot in Iran, agents repeatedly rehearsed the break in against a full scale replica of the warehouse built elsewhere, using duplicate versions of the actual Iranian made safe inside. Reportedly acquiring identical models in advance and practicing on how to actually cut them open long before the actual operation even came into existence. The night finally chosen in late January 2018 happened in coincide with the country's longest total lunar eclipse and a fog that settled over Tehran. Extra darkness that was neither planned nor needed but not turned down earlier or either. According to detailed accounts published since then, the two guards assigned to the building left the premises for several hours overnight, and it was inside that specific window that a team of agents disabled the alarm system, opened the vaults, and left with roughly half a ton of paper files and disks. Iran's own internal archive of its past nuclear weapons research without a single shot fired or a single agent even being caught. The material was revealed publicly by Israel's Prime Minister 3 months later. International reactions split sharply. Some officials called it old news. Others said it changed how they read Iran's nuclear institutions and intentions. And Iran itself has always publicly denied the archive's authenticity through later international inspections and claimed that they did not find any undeclared nuclear material at the site that the documents were actually pointing toward. This case is included not because everyone agrees on what it meant, but because it shows a decision advantage built entirely without violence. 2 years of patience, collection, and analysis executed in an overnight window, like a single overnight window, with nothing more dramatic than a set of lockpicks and a very good weather forecast. And the reputation is not unconditional. The same country whose intelligence services are widely regarded among the most capable in the world failed in 2023 to anticipate the October 7 attack, a failure publicly acknowledged and formally investigated by Israel itself. A system that gets the future right for decades is still a system. It is not an oracle, and this film isn't arguing about that. What actually earned Mossad its reputation isn't that it's always right. It's that it treats being wrong as data to be analyzed and not as an embarrassment that should be actually hidden from mainstream media or the global stage. The exact same discipline that makes the ladder work in the first place. Armies decide who wins a battle already being fought. Intelligence decides which battles are worth fighting at all, and increasingly, which ones never need to be fought because one side already knew how they'd go on to end. Every case study in this actual film that is being narrated is a stolen archive, a captured war criminal, and a killing that should have never ever happened. And it's the same ladder that is climbed at different speed, sometimes climbed too fast. Signal collection, data analysis, inside breakdown, decision advantage, and directly to an outcome that shapes before anyone is actually watching it and anyone could actually see it actively coming. That is the least visible form of power a state can hold, and possibly the most consequential one, because it never announces itself. It doesn't parade through a capital city, it just quietly decides years in advance what the parade will eventually need to be about.